Jeffrey Chin is best known for his first narrative short film, Little Tokyo Reporter, which stars Academy Award winner Chris Tashima, who is also another panelist today, as civil rights leader Sei Fujii. Jeffrey understudied late director John Singleton, working on commercials and television shows Billions and Snowfall. As a feature and commercial director, Jeffrey worked with Sam's Club, ACOM, Mattel, and Spotify, and Blackpink. Currently, Jeffrey is developing a graphic novel and next feature film on Sei Fujii, which hopefully he will share with us during our Q&A. So welcome, Jeffrey. And also we have Chris Tashima, who obviously was the star of this wonderful short film. Chris has been making films for nearly 45 years, which I find that hard to believe. You must have been like 5 when you started. He is most recognized as the Academy Award-winning director, co-writer, and star of Visas and Virtue, a short film portrait of Holocaust rescuer Chiune Sugihara. Chris started acting in the mid-'80s at East West Players under the leadership of Mako, appearing in Wakako Yamauchi's The Memento, Faye and Michael Kanan's Rashomon, and Rosanna Yamagiwa Alfaro's Mishima. On screen, he has often played generational Japanese American roles impacted by World War II incarceration, and you might recognize him also from the wonderful film that we have shown during Tadaima in the Past, No Girl, which is that came out in 2022, and he received a Best Actor nomination at the Austin Revolution Film Festival for that role. And finally, we have George Shaw. George's origin story began with a childhood of exposure to Saturday morning cartoons, superhero comics, and sci-fi fantasy and adventure movies, which inspired his imagination and talent for composing cinematic melodies. George recently scored Abominable and the Invisible City from DreamWorks Animation and Riot Games' 2023 Lunar Revel Cinematic. George's range of work also covers 17 feature films, including Baby Steps, produced by Oscar-nominated Lee Kong-soo, producer of Ang Lee's Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. George studied composition and film scoring at USC, Thornton School of Music. George was selected to the Universal Composers Initiative in 2018, the first Hollywood studio program to nurture diverse voices in composing. So welcome. So I wanted to ask, the first question I wanted to ask was, so the film actually came out about 11 years ago, I think. And I'm wondering, first of all, you know, the inspiration for it, but also what you all have been doing since then, obviously a lot, but to give us a little bit more in detail of what's been going on in the last decade.
I guess I'll start with it. So yeah, Little Tokyo Reporter, we developed probably around 2010, and we had shot it back in 2011. And by September 2012, we were able to have our first premiere. And so it's been like a really fun and exciting journey for us. In terms of what I've been up to personally is I ended up going to grad school. I went to USC. I worked on some TV shows, directed a film in India, and also got to work with John Singleton and, of course, Blackpink. And I guess sort of the button on all of this is that Little Tokyo Reporter was done before I even started grad school, and it was my very first short film. And so I'm really excited to talk more about our ongoing projects that we've been developing and the future project ahead.
Not a lot since we shot No Girl. I've been helping promote and touring with No Girl a little bit. Done a couple of other short films. One's going to be premiering actually this weekend, The Blue Jay by Marlene Shiyakawa, about a true story set in the Poston concentration camp, and doing little things here and there, helping Jeffrey develop his next project, which we'll talk about.
So yeah, quite a bit has happened since this film came out, over a decade, in fact. So you know, I've I've been consistently working as a film and TV composer. Done quite a few TV shows. Most recently with DreamWorks Animation. Do a little bit of video game work as well, and just constantly writing music and being creative and trying to support Jeffrey as much as I can with his filmmaking career. And we even wrote and created some funny spoof videos on YouTube called Star Wars Musical, which he directed and is wonderfully done. And just excited to see what we're hopefully going to do next, which will hopefully be big.
Yeah. So Jeffrey, what's next?
Yeah, so well, actually, during the pandemic, I had picked up a job. I was supervising a TV station. I had supervised it for a year and a half, and probably was the most amount of money that I had been consistently making. But I knew that in my heart of hearts that I needed to focus on trying to get the Sei Fujii feature off the ground, because I know that without sort of that determination to start telling these stories, we're never going to see it, or we'll probably see surface level Asian American stories that maybe studios greenlit and sort of quickly packaged together. And so I know that with all of our ongoing research and the resources and the community that has supported us, that I think this is the next big step. When do we get to tell stories like Scorsese or Spielberg about the Asian American community, and really have it come from our community's voices? So we'll talk more about it in a moment, but I think I'll let the other guys talk a little bit too.
Well, for me, I really have no idea what's next. It's sort of after, this whole year of the writers and actors being on strike, so much of Hollywood kind of ground to a halt. I mean, there's still some things in certain parts of the industry that are still going, like animation and documentaries, but even that stuff has slowed down. So it's it's been a year where I've been able to actually focus a little bit on doing smaller independent projects and work with a lot of up and coming filmmakers like Jeffrey, who are making short films and hopefully go on to do great things. So yeah, it remains to be seen what will happen and when things will pick up in the industry. But excited to see hopefully the actors get their contract so that they can move forward and start making stuff. So I'm excited for that, and probably soon I'll be writing an album of new music and hopefully recording with a big orchestra. So how about you, Chris?
Yeah, well, you mentioned the strike. I don't know whether we'll come out of this recent negotiations or not with a contract, but fingers crossed. So yeah, I'm going to some film festivals, and my Oscar winner, Visas and Virtue, actually is going to be shown in Los Angeles next month at the Asian World Film Festival. It's kind of nice because we recently had a 4K digital restoration done by the Academy, and this will be the first screening of the new restored print. So that should be nice. Being in a theater in Culver City, the Asian World Film Festival. So getting ready to blast the world about that event as soon as the schedule is confirmed. I have some projects of my own that I'm hoping to develop, but they're kind of far off, a little early for me to talk about. But always looking for the next thing.
So I guess I'll pick up the mic from here. So a little bit of background for Little Tokyo Reporter for those who maybe have seen it for the first time. It developed from about a few years of research with the Little Tokyo Historical Society. There was a founding member named Fumiko Carol Fujita who did research on the early history of Japanese American healthcare, and that connected with the historic Japanese hospital in Boyle Heights. She discovered in that research the story of Sei Fujii, an early an Issei who had immigrated from Yamaguchi-ken in 1903. He attended USC Law School, but was not allowed to practice because of the laws that prevented Asians from getting citizenship back then, and therefore professional licenses. So he had paired up with the law school classmate J. Marion Wright, and they had won 2 major Supreme Court cases together. And so with that research in history, I was introduced to that back in 2010 with the first National Asian Pacific Islander Historic Preservation Forum. And having 2 parents as attorneys, and also me really wanting to tell an important civil rights story, because even in my family, my grandfather was very involved with fighting for his community in New York, Chinatown, that it's always been a big dream of mine to really bring these stories to life. And so I feel really blessed for this opportunity. Leading into all of this, though, I did want to ask, Chris, because he's actually doing his 25th anniversary screening of Visas and Virtue, and Little Tokyo Reporter, of course, is over a decade old. Chris, like what makes films or projects something that, people are able to revisit and talk about over the years? Because Little Tokyo Reporter could have easily just disappeared into the ether like a bunch of feature films or even publications. And so, what do we need to do as artists that can allow us this opportunity to continually share our story?
I don't know that, I don't know if the artists actually have control over a lot of that. It's really the audience that demands for these projects to be seen and continue to be seen. But I think the key is for us, is just that we are telling our stories, and our stories have remained untapped by Hollywood. But what that means is we've got tons of amazing original American stories to tell. And I think it's originality that I think audiences respond to. They want to see something they've already seen before when it's something they have never seen before. And especially for, people of color, and especially Japanese Americans, when it's us on screen, we never get to see that, Japanese Americans. So there's just a lot of opportunity for us, to really immortalize these stories and tell them and in a format, movies, that I think is so unique, in that it really allows the audience to live in that time period or experience that particular story in a way I think that nothing else can do. And that's why I like to make movies, because it's so unique in how it touches audiences and allows you to experience really what it was like, what it felt like to be in that time period, and to be part of, stories like Sei Fujii's or Sugihara's. So, continue doing what you're doing. It's worth the effort. It takes years and years to get these projects made, but when you get to share with an audience, it's really worth it. And I feel fortunate because Little Tokyo Reporter has continued to be shown for the past dozen years. I don't know that it ever slowed down. So, I don't ever get tired of sharing the story, because it's new ears and eyes that are hearing his story for the first time. And, Jeffrey, when you walked into my office back in 2011 and shared your script, Little Tokyo Reporter, and as I was turning the pages, I'm just thinking to myself, I've never heard of this man, and it became so important that we tell his story. I mean, he died in the early 1950s, mid 1950s. And so, no one that knew him is around anymore. So it's up to us, to keep sharing this history, because it really is important. It impacted all of our, grandparents and great grandparents and all the immigrant Japanese and Little Tokyo. So I just feel lucky to be a part of that type of storytelling.
So, hey, Jeff,
Thank
you
you.
talked a little bit about the Tokyo Historical Society doing research on Sei Fujii's life. How did that story come to you?
Yeah, so at the first National Asian Pacific Islander Preservation Forum in San Francisco, I was representing Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation. So I'd been producing the documentaries for them, including some projects on Tyrus Wong, who was the Disney legend, who was the lead artist for Bambi. And, one of the park rangers actually introduced me to Carol Fujita, the founding member of the Little Tokyo Historical Society, and said, "You got to hear this story." So it literally went from hearing the story about the civil rights leader who helped build a hospital for his community in response to the 1918 flu epidemic, to discovering that the guy was an outspoken publisher of the Kashi Mainichi newspaper. He had a very checkered personal life because it was a bachelor society and the mafia was trying to go after him. And slowly through the research, I was like, well, I think we got to tell the story about the moment he's willing to risk it all, risk his own life to protect the future of his community. And that sort of became the core and heart of what Little Tokyo Reporter became. And it's funny because, Frank Truman, one of the early JA attorneys, he had mentioned that he thought it was incredible that Sei Fujii was able to risk everything at the peril of his own life to protect the future, because it was such a complex time. I mean, we've learned so much more, or at least I've learned so much more after our publication, which we'll talk about in a little bit, about this history and how colorful the world was. So you guys saw Tokyo Club, and it looked like I had 5 employees, but in reality, I just recently discovered that Tokyo Club was 75 feet by 100 feet. They had owned the Yamato Hall performing area. And so they also had sponsored a lot of events for the community. And they had over 100 employees, sort of like Vegas. They had a separate, caged cash area. And then if for some reason you lost all your money during your gambling, they had a free food area that you could eat. It's like such a colorful world that you don't get exposure to. And then from like another interview with Jack Kunitomi, he had grown up across Tokyo Club, and he recollected like watching all these raids. And it turned out that two mayors of LA were just being bribed by Tokyo Club, and it wasn't until Mayor Bowron came in that they started really properly raiding the facility, end up breaking through the skylight in order to make one of the biggest raids in the history of Tokyo Club. So I don't know, it's incredible, sort of going back into like what Chris was saying, like being able to return to a history and talk about it. Every time we do a little bit more research or find something else new, I think we owe it to the audience to present that, whether it's in graphic novel, book form, or feature film form.
Yeah, you have to remember how vibrant the Japanese American community was during the 20s and 30s, before the war. And, there were little Tokyos up and down the whole West Coast, Japantowns, dozens of them. And the community just was so active and alive. And, all of the things that went on in Little Tokyo. I mean, we depicted the 1935 beginning of Nisei Week parade, but, those were huge. I mean, you can't compare them to, what goes on today, because the community was so much bigger and active and alive. So, yeah, that whole history, has really disappeared, because there's so much, so much not written about it. There's not a lot of projects about Japantown in the mid 30s. Um, and so, you know, that again, it's just so important whenever we get a chance to bring some of that back to life, because it was such a big part of who we were before the war, what we lost during the war, and where we had to start over after the war, and how that impacted our families, and how much Japanese American part of the American fabric, you know, just so accurately before the war.
You know, where Chris said that so little we know so little about this community in the 20s and 30s, and it's really wonderful how this film, and hopefully the feature that we'll eventually make, will be sort of the time machine that takes us to see what that was like.
I think that it's like important whenever we create a project that there's that stickiness factor. As I mentioned, being able to return to the stories because we can enrich the conversations, or we can at least share it with the next generation to have it made. I think one of the important steps in all of this is that we've not intentionally, but we kind of made an ecosystem of JA civil rights, or at least Sei Fujii, within Sei Fujii's lens of the world that of Little Tokyo that he had known. Because you know, this short film, even though we got a bunch of awards, we had got it Academy qualified and got into Cannes Short Film Corner. You know, the real you know, results of it was actually the subsequent projects that came out of it. So if you guys didn't know, we were able to build a memorial lantern in the Second Street entrance of Japanese Village Plaza. And so that's there and tells the story of Sei Fujii. We were able to get a historic designation for the Japanese hospital, which was led by Kristen and Mike Okamura from our Little Tokyo Historical Society. And then more recently, we were able to get a posthumous law license thanks to JABA for Sei Fujii. He's actually the first Japanese American in California to receive a posthumous law license. And from a person that, you know, the Kashimainichi is no longer around. So it's not like we're telling the story of one of the very prominent newspapers like the Rafu. Sei Fujii's story would have been forgotten. And to bring it to life is such a gift. I've been able to meet with J. Marion Wright's daughter. I met with Sei Fujii's granddaughter in Iwakuni. And to share the stories, to share that research, I think in some ways that we're able to finally tell stories that hopefully will transcend outside of the Asian American community. We look at the prominent stories that maybe are taught occasionally if we're lucky in textbooks about Korematsu, but when you look in American history books, we get Cesar Chavez and Martin Luther King as the preeminent civil rights stories. When do we get to tell more of the Asian American stories? And here is a singular example of one, and hopefully of many that we can tell. And so luckily through this unintentional ecosystem we created, the Sei Fujii universe, we've been very lucky. And Chris and George, maybe you just have some observations.
No, Jeffrey, I want to commend you, first of all, with all that you've done for the Sei Fujii story. You kind of skimmed over it, but you know, first the Little Tokyo Porter, the lantern, you know, the lantern in Little Tokyo, and the book Rebel's Outcry, which is a beautiful book, which you know, tells everything. But and I also want to give a shout out to Carol Fujita, who I think if it weren't not for her, then you would have done none of this. And it was through her efforts, not just the initial meeting and sharing the, you know, the first story, but producing the film. The film really is, you know, what kicked off everything in terms of Sei Fujii's, you know, uncovering of his history, and literally lost. It was lost. No one would have known. We wouldn't be talking about him today if it weren't for Carol. So, you know, she she just the things that she did, that what she sacrificed to make this film. I mean, Jeffrey, I mean, obviously you made the film, but you're a filmmaker and you love to make the film and you know what filmmaking is and you know, you live and die with it. That's your job. Carol is not a filmmaker. She was a retired pharmacist, you know, she was looking to, you know, enjoy her retirement and help the Little Tokyo Historical Society. And in comes Jeffrey saying, I want to make this film. And, you know, I remember having meetings with her in the beginning. Because I was helping to consult with you. And it was hard for me to keep from telling her, you know, you're crazy to think you can make this film. You don't have any idea how hard filmmaking is. But, you know, if I said that to her, my job wasn't to kill the project. It was to help make the project. So, you know, I supported her in every way I could. And I shared with her in honesty everything that I knew about the reality of making a short film. It was going to be really difficult. And I kept telling her, this is going to be years in, you know, and you won't make any money and you're lucky if it gets made, but you know, we got to do this. So, you know, I joined her in it. I joined you, and, you know, the two of you together were just a perfect team, because, you know, you could not do any of your creative ingenuity without someone there to support the film being made. And that was Carol. So, you know, I'm grateful to the both, because I mean, I'll say it again, Sei Fujii's story was completely lost. It was forgotten. It was unknown. And, you know, thanks to you, we have this beautiful book and the movie, and we'll have more coming, and, you know, the posthumous law license and historic designation of Japanese hospital. And there's so much that you've done. And it was all kicked off with the film. So I just feel lucky to have been part of the little film that could.
Thank you. It's I mean, like Carol she traveled to me back. So going through the steps, because I know a lot of you guys might be creatives or want to tell stories about your own community, family histories. During the time we produced Little Tokyo Reporter, we had discovered there's a book called Rafu Gigyu Ondo, which means the Gigyu is like a rebellious fish from Yamaguchi. It looks like a catfish. And this author was commissioned by the Kashi Mainichi to write a biography on Sei Fujii. And that was published in 1983. It was written entirely in Japanese. So we had it slowly translated, and then we were able to track down the author, who was still alive, Kenichi Sato, through another writer who had been working with Pacific Citizen and previously had worked with the Kashu. And so after we had just filmed Little Tokyo Reporter, not even finished editing it, Carol and I traveled all the way to Sakata and Yamagata Prefecture to meet the author, which would become a Rebel's Outcry. Maybe Chris can feature it. And so this took like 10 years of translation work. We had collected all of our research from all of our ongoing interviews. We had even met an individual who was present while Sei Fujii was giving a eulogy for a friend who helped fund the Kashi Mainichi. And during that funeral, he actually ends up having some sort of stroke, and he ends up collapsing at the temple and passing away. And the photo is literally moments before Sei Fujii had passed away. So we have that incorporated into our book. This sort of eclectic process and research, as Chris mentioned, is crazy. I think everybody thought even the film or even the book was a crazy idea, and sort of going into it blindly, even though it's taken a lot longer, has ended up with some sort of interesting results that make something feel a little bit more tangible and personal for people. I don't know, George, if you have any observations about what sort of has helped us make this progress.
The amount of research you've done on Sei Fujii over the last decade or more, actually, is quite incredible. I mean, putting together this book. I know you've gone to Japan multiple times to learn about his past and his family. and his sort of journey to America and all that is just incredible. And I know you're still working on it. You're still going, trying to make a feature film about his life. Um, so I mean, certainly you're the one who's holding the torch, and hopefully we'll carry it over the finish line with you.
I want to ask you a question about your score for Little Token Reporter, because I just think it's beautiful, and it lifts the film to, you know, another level that was so important in the success of the movie and how it continues to play. I mean, I'm also a filmmaker, so you know I know how important scores are. And as we're making the film, I didn't know who was score it. Jeffrey had other people actually he was talking to about scoring it, and you know I knew how important it was. Um, but I wasn't I wasn't ready for what I heard when I heard your score, because it was just so moving and so appropriate and so emotional. And but what, you know, what was your approach going into it? Because you can go so many different directions, especially with what you might call an ethnic film. Some people look at it as a Japanese film, a Japanese character, a Japanese story. I mean, there's so many different directions that you could go, but you didn't go that route. Just can you just talk about, if you can remember, going into the film, and what were your inspirations for it, and how you came up with the melodies and the orchestrations?
You know, to me, it's an American film. You know, it's
Yes.
even though the characters are ethnically Japanese, it's about an American experience. You know, Asian American immigrant experience. So I felt like it just needed a timeless orchestral score to really highlight their emotional journeys. And so to me, it's very Americana. The music is very kind of inspired by, you know, those kind of other period films of that period, as well as, you know, composers like Aaron Copland um, and other, you know, film scores that, you know, go way back. Um, you know, and just writing the melodies were just, I mean, it's hard to remember now, but it's very much inspired just by the film itself, the story, and what the characters are going through. So, you know, that's really all I tapped into, and you know, we're really lucky to actually record a live orchestra with no budget. Basically, all the money was spent to make the film look amazing, and you know, I mean, recreating period 1930s sets and you know, doing visual effects to create those outdoor, um, like, you know, 1930s streets of Los Angeles, which don't exist anymore. You know, that's the money was well spent on all those aspects. And the way we were able to actually record an orchestra, I just happened to be helping out on another project. It was like an album recording. So we had a small orchestra hired, and I spent so much time just making sure everything would be perfect and run smoothly, so that we would actually finish 15 minutes early, so that we had like 10-15 minutes to like quickly record everything. And then a few other things I recorded in my studio, um, including myself playing, you know, piano and clarinet. And you know, we were just so fortunate that just the timing of when we were making it lined up with that other project, so we were able to really have this timeless sound that captured the time period and the emotional journey of the characters.
Speaking to that, the fact that we went through two composers before George, and they had some incredible credits. And you know, George really jumped in and made the film what it needed to be through his music. And you know, I knew of George's style, but I didn't know until he started composing how fitting it would become. And I don't know. It, I used to play piano, so I would communicate in my broken musical language to George, but somehow he still got it.
Yeah, I just I'm just a movie nerd and love music and soundtracks and um I don't think I could articulate how I do what I do. It just happens somehow. But it's great to have a wonderful filmmaker to collaborate with who has a vision and can give me something inspiring to write music to.
Thank you. So I'm going to give you guys a quick update about what is going to happen next, and then I want to open to Q&A so you guys have enough time to interact with us. So I'm really excited. In fact, I got pushed into starting to talk about it. We're going to go for a feature film, and it was only over this past year that the board members of LTHS, especially Jerry Nakafuji, was like saying, "You got to talk about, talk about the feature film." Um, and so let me give you a quick some visuals of what has gone into this research and what we're looking at going forward. So Sei Fujii had gone to USC. He came from a heritage of samurai. There's with him with the Kashi Mainichi. His law partner came from the heritage of English knights. That's J. Marion Wright. So you have a story of a knight and samurai heritage fighting for civil rights for the community. Of course, you have the Kashi Mainichi, Japanese hospital, assassination attempts. We discovered there's like many times there's assassination attempts and times they even tried to burn down the newspaper. Some images of the Japanese hospital. This is in Iwakuni and Sei Fujii's ancestral home that he actually grew up in. This is at Yamaguchi University. And this is, of course, Little Tokyo Reporter, which became the catalyst for all these wonderful projects. And then if you guys have a chance to visit Little Tokyo, you can see the lantern on the left side. So that was designed by Miles Endo, son of Kenny Endo. Miles's maternal great-grandfather was in Santa Fe with Sei Fujii. In the middle, we have J. Marion Wright's great-grandson, Owen Kupfer, who was a law partner with J. Marion Wright. His daughter is there, along with Lindsay Sugimoto, who went to USC Law and helped with the petition with Sydney Kanazawa and his team. That's the posthumous law license and the Japanese hospital on the right. All of this culminated into our wonderful book. So we hope that you can have a chance to take a look at it. There's a link in the chat. Each chapter opens up with a Miyazaki-esque painting. So sort of tableau painting that tells you what's going on, along with smaller images like the New Yorker. Over the pandemic, I was able to also share the book with Sei Fujii's great-granddaughter, Maho, and she was really, really happy to celebrate her grandfather, and hopefully we'll put together the Japanese edition. We also met with the mayor of Iwakuni, Mayor Fukuda, who's been a longtime supporter of us. But most importantly right now is our next two projects that are coming up, which is a graphic novel, which was funded by the California Civil Liberties Public Education Program grant. So it's going to be a graphic novel series. We've been working with some wonderful artists who've been breaking down stylistic covers and how we're going to approach the different chapters and images. Right now it's currently called Shimbun. And here was an early draft, but the artwork's going to completely change. Maybe Chris, I love when Chris reads Sei Fujii's dialogue here. You can take a quick read of Sei Fujii's words.
In those days, I was sharply criticized by government officers, bankers, or intellectuals in the name of Kashi Mainichi, and relentlessly attacked those who made the fellow Japanese suffer. Because of that, Japanese held a grudge against me and hated me.
So on November 26, 1932, past midnight, Sei Fujii was ambushed outside his office. They tried to hit him with a metal pipe and strangled him. And they shot him through the cheek, and he'd be later saved by a pin. We discovered Sei Fujii's ancestral history. in Okayama, where his great ancestor was a warlord. We also discovered he came from the Ouchi clan, which comes from the may have some origins with the early Hakje priests from Korea. And so I did a lot of research on that, along with the historic fortresses in Okayama. So that's the Kinojo, which was known as the Demon Castle. And then on the right is actually the temple in Iwakuni that Sei Fujii's great ancestor was banished to. So we've been using some visual effects and all that to help generate our AI to start generating some of these images. So beyond that, that's still stuff that we had worked on a couple of years ago, but right now we just received a new grant from CCLEP for 62,500 for Shimbun for a concept short that we'll be using to promote and launch the feature. We also have Chris, he's going to executive produce our short and feature, and it will be starring a very prominent Japanese actor who we're in early discussions with. It follows the story when Sei Fujii is paired up with J. Marion Wright, but also attorney Hugh Macbeth. So we're also in discussions with very prominent Black actors as well, which luckily I've connected with through John Singleton. We will be planning to shoot our concept in the spring. And I just came from the Busan Film Festival, where I'm connected with some major actors there, and also in Hong Kong with our USC connections. So currently a major company connected with USC is pitching at Tokyo International Film Festival to garner further funds for this feature. The feature, if produced entirely in Asia, could be a third of the cost of an American feature, but in America, it will probably cost 20 to 30 million. It is a big risk. We'll probably offset a lot with, donations and investments from hopefully organizations that have larger funds or tech companies. But I feel that just as we've done with Little Tokyo Reporter, we can make longstanding value with the feature in order to provide, for our current and earlier generations, but also future generations. And hopefully this can be a model for other films of Asian American pioneers to be told. With that said, I'd love to open up to some Q&A, and then we can start interacting with you guys as well.
I'll ask a question. Jeffrey, you talked a little bit about this feature that you'd like to make. Are there any particular parts of Sei Fujii's life you'd like to focus on, if you were able to tell that story?
Yeah, so one of the histories that is challenging is the years leading up to World War II. As we know, Sei Fujii was a community leader, but that doesn't mean everybody loves you. There's a period where he actually had confronted immigration because there was an immigration smuggling ring, and it turned out that immigration was making money off of bribes by people being captured and so you had a bribe to get your way out. But there's also JAs and small businesses who were taking money off the top too by turning in their own people. So this incident actually led up to Fujii going to court. They expelled the immigration officer along with some of these business owners, and that led to the foundation of the Kashi Mainichi. So that's a little bit of backstory of where our character is. He's become a community leader sort of de facto in that period because he was so outspoken, but not totally beloved. And there's a period right before World War II, of course, when the FBI decides that they want to prove or they want to disprove the loyalty of the Japanese American people. But in order to do that, they have to enlist Japanese Americans to start spying on their own. And so we're really digging into very delicate material. I've been consulting with Susan Kamei, Ellen Ando, and Naomi Hirahara to be very delicate about how we deal with this. But it's an important part of the story because it touches upon what is Japanese American during that time. And I'm really excited to explore that. And it also, I think it's important to show within the context of, how the FBI and government's involvement was so invested during that time.
Yeah, my internet is going in and out, so I hope this goes through. Hey guys, and hey Chris, we have some things in common other than we both have salt and pepper beards now. I was at East West Players probably the time before you, when Mako was there. And of course, we have something in common with Kazuo Sugihara. You had your film, and I had my picture book, Passage to Freedom, the Sugihara story.
Passage to Freedom.
Right. And but my question is for all three of you, if you had a Hollywood-sized budget, what would be the film that you would make? Or did you already answer that? Nihomachi and Before the War? Of any subject or any person.
Wow, that's a great question. A number of projects that I would love to do that require Hollywood style budgets. So, I mean, there's so much history, having been in this business for this long now, gathering all these stories. You know, a 442 film, an MIS film. You can see this hat I'm wearing. Haworth was Setsu Hayakawa's own production company. He founded in 1918 in order to have a little more creative control over the roles that he was playing. His story would make a great film. And there's a book. This is not JA, but there's a book that I was part of a children's play called Dragon Wings by Lawrence Yep. Just a beautiful story about Chinese immigrants turn of the century that I would love to see as a film. So those are just a handful. I mean, I could pitch a dozen movies.
Be a part of any movies Jeffrey and Chris are making, because it's really wonderful to have Asian American stories be told, and to do a big budget one would be pretty amazing, especially if we could go into these historical stories that like I said before, like it's a time machine to another time, to see that come alive and to write really something for like a World War II movie where we could use a big orchestra, lots of drums, lots of violins and brass, like do a big sound. That would be a lot of fun.
I think one thing that's really interesting is that a lot of films that get acclaimed in Hollywood always like to show a story of minorities being oppressed. And you'll see them sort of qualifying for Oscars and awards and things like that. And especially when you look at the internment stories, it's a lot of pain that they're showing, and all of that is very valid. But for me, I'm very interested in showing a story about perseverance and fighting back and instilling that fire that the Issei had. These guys came over. It would have been, a disgrace if they had to return back to Japan empty-handed, if they were deported or whatever might happen, and to really show their ability to risk it all, both for themselves, but the future of their community, and that fire that was instilled to fight back regardless of how the government wanted to label them. And so, I mean, that's the reason why I'm so excited about Sei Fujii's story, because, right before the war, he started having hypertension and got very sick. Yet there was people and his friends and allies who actually started stepping up to fight back too. And I think that is just as valid, and people need to see stories of Asian American community before World War II. Otherwise, we're constantly seen, as immigrants rather than fellow Americans. And so that's something I'm very passionate about and determined, and not needing to validate those people economically in power to say that your story is valid because you oppressed our community. It's like, no, we're going to tell a story about how no matter what, our communities are going to thrive, and it's not like we're ill-intentioned in our vision to contribute to the country we love.
I might ask a somewhat controversial question that's brewing in my head, just as opinion. Oppenheimer. I was just going to drop that Oppenheimer. That's it. No. So there's a huge, big budget Hollywood film. You know, do you think that it's possible to make something like that about Asian Americans that could receive as much acclaim and buzz?
I think that's
Well,
one of the biggest challenges. Chris, you probably have better insight.
Yeah, I mean, part of the buzz there is, you know, the director's track record, and you know, so it took him, you know, he's had a career for a long time. So it, you know, if that film just was made by a nobody, it, you know, it wouldn't have come out with such a strong buzz following. I by the way haven't seen it. I'm knowing that I'll just get really upset when I see it. So I'm waiting till I get a screener as Academy member, and I'll watch it. I'll stream it, but not that. I mean, the director is brilliant, and I love his work. But you know, everything that I've heard about this particular piece of history and what's missing, or you know, what he chooses to focus on. That's his business, and you know, again, I haven't seen it, but I think that, you know, that film is just around the corner. I mean, we have within the last 6 years, you know, seen a big shift. I think I've seen it. I felt it in Hollywood, where Asian American projects are no longer viewed as a risk, and they're actually desired by many because they've proven to make money. I'm speaking, of course, following Crazy Rich Asians and a number of films that have come after that have been a success at the box office. And so we're leading up to the point where we're going to get big budgets on historical narratives, you know. So, you know, I think it's coming.
Yeah, it was interesting to see Oppenheimer because it, you know, it was a 3 hour movie, and he's an excellent director. And you know, I enjoyed watching Dunkirk, and he is masterful. The narrative can be very simple, and you can just tell a story that's compelling. But watching Oppenheimer also gave me insight of how the length of our film should be, which is slightly shorter.
Not 3 hours?
Because if he is so masterful, if he's so masterful, it helps me and give insight, because you know, this would be my second feature. I'm like, if I gotta compete against that masterful level, you know, I just have to make sure every sequence has added value. And so even when I was at Busan Film Festival, I was studying all the different films about how they're approaching to tell stories, how to add texture to the world, whether it's layered or not. And it's helped me get that insight. I mean, even for this feature film, right now we're talking to Guillermo del Toro's team about the concept art. I'm discussing with the team from ILM and Lucasfilm, who've been doing Mandalorian and the Obi-Wan series, about how do we make a compelling, grounded and visual space that feels populated, lived in, so that we can create something that doesn't look like it was sort of pieced together with CG. And I think that is one of my highest priorities, to make sure that this world feels right. That's just the film nerd in me, but I don't know, gets me really excited. What my rule is right now is that the camera can go anywhere it wants to go. Meaning, if we were visiting 1938 Los Angeles or the World's Fair in San Francisco, where would we put the camera if we were allowed to be there? And that way I would not feel like we're compromising anything. And that's my vision. Obviously there'll be, you know, budgetary limitations, but my mindset of finding those exact visuals, I think will be worthwhile for us.
Awesome. And then of course, George will do the big sweeping score.
Yeah, that's the plan.
George, by the way, discovered he's a quarter Japanese, and
Discovered.
so
Yeah,
yeah,
something my family never told me until I was in my mid-20s. And we were at Thanksgiving, and my cousin mentioned that my grandma was Japanese, and she's right over in the next room. And I had no idea because I'd only ever heard her speak Chinese. But she was 14 when she moved from Japan to Taiwan, and so spent most of the rest of her life in Taiwan. So I just didn't know that about her early history.
yeah. So I was planning that for this feature, George would go visit where his grandmother is from, which is in sort of near Fukuoka, Nagasaki area, and then also spend some time in Yamaguchi. I want, whether that transcends into George or not, I want him to meet the people, try the food, and just get a feeling of it, because the music isn't just for ourselves in the United States, but it's honoring, the origins. And so I always feel like it's important to feel the texture of the world and the people. So that's why right now I'm actually currently in Japan, supposed to be writing. Chris is like, I've been slow in my process.
Well, and along those lines, I want to be mindful of the time. So we're at the 90-minute mark. So I'm wondering if anybody has any final thoughts. So Jeffrey can go and write. And write. No, but seriously, do you have any, well, first of all, any last questions? And while you're thinking about those final questions, maybe some final thoughts, or maybe how the community can help.
One major step that we're going to have to go through for this feature is that obviously, even though I'm writing this initial drafts of the screenplay, we're probably going to bring in some really expert writers, and we'll have to get funds to do that. So we are accepting donations to the Little Tokyo Historical Society, which is a 501c3. And those funds can help support the pre-production of all of this. The more money we're able to raise in this pre-production phase, especially through donations, is going to make it easier when we get to work with the studios. Little Tokyo Reporter was supported by Sony Pictures, and I'm hopeful that we can reconnect with their connection, but you never know how streaming goes in the future as well. And so we're looking for as much donations to help get us to that next step, because it's going to truly help.
Well, money is always, of course, what we need to make movies, and it's if any of you have a billionaire cousin, that's great. But aside from that, first of all, I want to thank all of you that logged in and are watching this, because that's really important in itself. Anytime you show up for an artist's work, it really means a lot. That's why we do what we do. And if people don't show up, we love doing it, but it kind of, it's not able to live it the rest of its life because it hasn't fallen on, eyes and ears of new people. So I want to thank you all for, watching and listening and everything that you do to support us, and please continue to support artists. And I want to thank Tadaima. Tadaima is amazing. Every year, what it does and what it brings to the public, and the way that it does it, and everything that's done. So thank the Japanese American Memorial Pilgrimages and everyone involved with Tadaima, including all the other people participating, and it's a wonderful thing to happen every year.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Chris said. Thank you so much for showing up and supporting us, and hopefully we'll get to make more, so you can come see more stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. As Chris and George so eloquently said, without the community support, without Tadaima, programs like the Memorial Pilgrimages, this is a platform a platform for us to be able to continue sharing the stories, and all of this would not have been possible without everyone here. So we really, really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. We appreciate you. And, you know, we're here to support however we can. So, and thank you all for tuning in tonight. And we have one day left of Tadaima. That's tomorrow. So be sure to watch our scary stories with Alton Chung. He's going to share some scary Japanese folklore. And then we have a little fun thing with Brian Nia as our host of JA Jeopardy. So want to tune in and watch that. But I thank you all. Thank you very much. And have a good rest of your evening. Appreciate you all. Thanks. Bye.